Hello everyone, this is Reza Durrani. Welcome to another video of the Flow Cookbook series. In this video, we will focus on the single approval pattern. We will look at how we can assign approvers dynamically, and also we will look at how we can create an audit trace of all the approval activities that have taken place. So the scenario here is a help desk application where users make a request in a SharePoint list and the approval process begins. So let's get started with the video, but first, my intro. The scenario here is that I have a list in SharePoint called Help Center. This is my data source wherein all the ticket related information of my organization comes into. I have a supporting list known as departments. So when the user creates a ticket, they pick a category which is associated with the department related to the ticket that they are creating. And in this scenario, for each department that they select, we have a lookup column in the ticket list that looks up to this list, which is my departments list. And here I am dynamically defining my approvers for each of the department types. Now in this scenario, I have created two columns for approvals. One is a simple text column that I'm going to use for dynamic approvals. The other one is a people picker column. I want to show you both use cases. Typically, I've seen a lot of scenarios where the text field is used, but I also want to show you how you can use the people picker column directly. Back to my main list. So the scenario here is we create the ticket. The moment the ticket is created, we want to start the approval process. So this is a single approval pattern that we are going to utilize here, and the approvers are going to be dynamically defined. So let's go ahead and start building the approval flow. I am in Flow. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on New and go to Automated. The reason why I'm picking Automated is because I want to automatically trigger my flow when a new item is created in a SharePoint list. And here is my trigger. I will give this flow a name. I'm going to call this my help desk approval workflow. And I will hit create. Now the moment I do this, this will go ahead and create the flow for me and associate the trigger, which is when an item is created. Now I need to connect this with my SharePoint list. I will go ahead and pick my site, and I will go ahead and pick my list, which is my help desk list. Now, once I'm done defining my trigger, my next step is going to be to start the approval process. But before I begin the approval process, if I head back to my list right here, if you notice here, we have this information that we are capturing from the user. At the same time, I have a column called ticket status. This is a very simple choice field in SharePoint. By default, the value is new. The moment the approval process begins, I want to change the value to pending because the approval is now in pending. And I also have an approval commence multi-line of text column in SharePoint wherein I will try and maintain an audit trail of the entire approval process. So let's see how we can do this in the flow. Back to the flow, I will go ahead now, and the first thing I want to do is, because the flow has triggered, I want to go ahead and update the item in SharePoint. So I'm going to pick the update item action. And right here, once again, I'm going to update the item in which site, in which list. I'm going to pick the same list. And the ID is the unique ID of the item that you want to update. I'm going to pick the ID dynamic column coming from my trigger. That's my ID. Now, bear in mind, when you're using the update item action, any fields that you've marked as mandatory will have to be refilled. That is by design. So I'm just going to go back and pick the same dynamic content value. So whatever title the user had picked, I'm going to pick it right here. Ticket description is going to come here. Ticket due date is going to come here. Now, the ticket priority, if you notice, by default, it's going to low because that's my default value. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to change this and pick enter custom value right here. And I'm going to pick the ticket priority value that the user had entered. Now for the ticket status value, I have this defined as new. I want to change this to pending. Why? Because my approval process is starting. That's the first thing I want to do. The next thing that I want to do is, you see the section for approval comments. This is where I'm going to define the comments of my approval. Now in this scenario, because the user has created the request, I want to put in those details right here. So I want to say approval started by, right? Who started this approval process? By the user who created the item. So under dynamic content, I can search for created by displayed name. So approval started by this user, and I want to also define the date and time when this approval process started. So I'm going to go ahead and use created right here. Okay, so it's going to put the created date for me right here when this approval process has started. You can also add emojis in here just to make it a little bit more interactive. So I'm just going to put a very simple note emoji right here stating that this user has started the approval process. Now the data that will come in for the date column will be in UTC format. Of course, you would want to format this in a more efficient way. So instead of directly using the date column, I'm going to go to an expression and type in an expression for dates. It's very, very important to learn expressions in order to truly utilize conversion formulas and other scenarios in flows. I will put a link in the description of this video. I'm doing an expression series with John Levesque. Please do check that series out if you want to learn more about expressions. So the expression that I'm going to use is convert from UTC because everything comes in UTC format. It's asking me for the date. So I'll go to dynamic content, pick the created date because that's when technically this flow has started. So I'm going to pick created. It's asking me for the time zone of my destination. I am in Pacific, so Pacific Standard Time. You can pick your respective time zone right here. And then finally, it's asking me for the format in which I want this information to go out. So I'm just going to put in a format which is year, month, and day. You can define your own formats here. Just going to click on OK. So I have an expression right here. So I have gone ahead and updated the item the moment the user creates an item in my ticketing list because the approval process begins, and notice that the status changes the moment the flow begins. The next thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and grab my approvers. Now, typically what I've observed is many folks use the text column in SharePoint purely because it's the easiest way for them to define their approvers. And what they do is they actually go in, like for example, marketing right here, right? Marketing is my department. I have hard-coded 2 email addresses in here, which is my own account, which is Reza's account, and another user called James. So they are going to be my approvers. When you create the approval action, when you are defining your approvers, they have to be email addresses in there, semicolon separated, and that's the reason why we define this in the text column. Now you can do this and you can leverage this, but you can also leverage a people picker type column, which is a lot more intuitive in SharePoint and a lot more easier to update and maintain, rather than putting in email addresses in a text column, wherein there is a probability of you making a mistake while typing in the email address, or maybe you missed the semicolon. So let's go back to flow and see how we can grab this information. So the next step in my flow is going to be to go and grab that information from this list. For this, I will use an action called get items. Get items from my SharePoint list, and this time I am going to go ahead and once again pick my SharePoint site. My SharePoint list is called departments, and over here I need to do something known as a filter query because I want to filter this list to get those records that match my criteria. So I need to perform a filter query on the title column. So I'm going to put title is equal to, in single quotes, this time I need to put the category that the user has selected because that's the column that's looking up to that field. So I'm going to pick the category, which is a lookup column, the value. Why? Because I want the text. I'm trying to compare the text out here. I can even do this on the ID. In this scenario, I'm just going to pick the text. Get me all the records from my departments list. Now, best practice, always rename your actions up front. So I'm going to say get departments. Okay, so I've got this. And now the next step that I want to execute is I just want to go ahead and get from this query, I need the approvers text. Now what I can do right here is I can go ahead and create a variable, initialize a variable, and this is of type string. I'm going to keep it empty, and this will be approvers. I am going to pick this and move this right at the top. And now I'm going to go ahead and set my variable because I have performed the query. So I'm going to set the variable for approvers, and I need to set this to what? Now from that departments query that I just fired, all I need from there is the approvers text in case of the text scenario. Now the moment I pick approvers text, you will observe that it puts an apply to each loop around the set variable action. And the reason is because whenever you use the get items action, it will always and always return an array irrespective of the number of items that get returned. In my scenario, I'm 100% sure that I have one unique record for a department, and if the scenario matches, it will go and get me the respective approvers for that item. So I'm setting the variable for approvers to my approvers text. So now that I'm done with this, I'm going to go ahead with my next step, which is my approval process. And this is a very simple single approval pattern. So I'm going to create an approval, and I'm going to pick the start and wait for an approval action right here. If you would like to see what those different approval actions are, what are the different approval types, make sure to check the description of this video. The first part of the approval video series covers exactly that. In this case, I'm going to pick the first to respond. So the first approver to respond, their decision will be taken as the final decision for the help desk ticket. Now for the title, I'm going to say new request for, and I'm going to put the title that the user has entered in the request that the user has put in. So you need to make sure that you are getting the right value from the right action. So I'm going to look out for when an item is created and pick the title. So new request created for so and so by the created by display name, and that too coming from the trigger, right? So a new request for so and so has been created by this user. Now it's asking me for assign to. Now in assign to, the first thing you will notice is it's just the people picker here. If you want to plug in actual email addresses, switch over to the advanced mode, and this is where you can type in the email addresses separated by a semicolon. In my scenario, I already have that data in that variable called approver, so I'm just going to straight away go and use that variable. The next thing is the details of my approval action. Now over here, I can define all the details of my approval action. Item link is basically a link to the item. Notice that the trigger itself has that, so I can directly link over to the item in SharePoint. I can even give a description to that link, so I can just give the title maybe of my request that came in. The requester, I'm going to put in the person who created this request. So once again, switch over to advanced mode, pick created by email. So here's my created by email. So that's the requester. I'm going to send a notification, enable reassignments. Let's say it's yes for now. So that's it. Created this approval action. The next step is going to be for me to add a condition to check the response of the approval. So remember, we have that option called outcome. So I'm going to pick the outcome. Because I picked first to respond, I will only have one response here, either approve or reject. I'm going to pick approve. So if it is approve, go here and do certain things. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and update the item. Now I have already updated the item right here. So just go ahead and copy this and go to your clipboard, and I'm going to paste it right here. So I'm updating the item if this is approved, right? Make sure to rename it. So approved update item. So if it is approved, go ahead and put all this information, which is fine, right? The next thing that I want to do right here is I want to change the ticket status. I want to make this ticket status as completed, because the ticket is complete or approved, whatever your status is. And for the approval comments, now remember, I have already put in the approval comments right here when I updated the item. Now if I go ahead and plug in the same information, it will write the same information, but I don't want to do that. So this time I am going to remove all of this, and I need to first put in the previous value, what was there in that approval column. How can I get that? Search for approval comments. And this time, don't pick the trigger, pick update item. Why? Because when I updated this item, I have the approval comments right here. So I'm going to pick this, right? So I have this. And additionally, I want to add additional information right here. And that's going to come right here on the top. I just need to put in the details of the approver. So I'm going to say approved by, right? Who has approved this action? So approved by. Now who has approved this is the approver. There's a dynamic content here as well. It's called the responses approver name, right? I'm going to pick this. Now, the moment I pick this, it's going to apply the for loop. Remember, this is all explained in the previous exercise. So go and check that video. So you'll create this for loop, which is fine. It's getting the responses, getting the approver's name, the person who approved this. So responded by so-and-so, right? Approved by so-and-so. And I need to put the date and time at which this was approved. I'm going to go ahead and grab the same expression that I did previously, because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. And I will go right here and this time go back to dynamic content. The only difference is, instead of using the created date, I need to pick the approved date. So I'm going to go back to dynamic content, and in the approval action, there is something known as completion date, the date that the approval was completed. So I'm just going to pick this and say OK. So I'm saying that approved by so and so at this date and time, and I can even put in the comments right here. So I can put a colon right here, and I can just search for responses comments coming in from my approval action. So it'll put the approver's comments right here. And once again, a little bit of emojis to make it look a little cooler. So I'm just going to put in my check mark right here because it has been approved. That's it. So I'm updating the item. Of course, I can send an email notification back to the requester. I can do all that good stuff here as well, but I'm just going to keep this very simple for now. Next thing what I want to do is if it is rejected, I will go ahead and once again copy, go right here and paste. This time, let's open this. In this scenario, all I want to do is instead of completed, I'm going to say rejected. And rather than saying approved by, I'm going to say rejected by. And I'm going to also change my emoji right here. Let's change the emoji. That's good enough. And I can finally go ahead and save my flow. Once the flow is saved, the flow is ready to run. Let's get back to my help desk list in SharePoint. So let's say a user comes in, and in my case, I'm playing the role of the user, which is Reza. Reza comes in and makes a request. So I have an issue with my phone, and this is a low priority ticket. I can pick a due date for my ticket, and give a description for my ticket. I can pick my category. Now, in my case, I'm going to pick facilities as my category, and I will go ahead and save this. My flow is now listening to when an item gets created in the SharePoint list, it should go ahead and trigger. And the moment it triggers, the status will change because that's the first thing we were doing in the flow. So let me just refresh this. It's still new. We're still waiting for the flow to run. So as you can see, my flow has triggered. The ticket status has gone to pending. Also look at the approval comments. I got that emoji right here and says approval started by Reza Durrani at this date and this time. Perfect. Converted to my time zone and also in a readable format. Now, if I go to the department and if I look at facilities, the approvers are Sarah and James. So both these user personas would have got the approval emails. Here I am logging in as James. Notice that James gets the approval email. Also, here I am logging in with Sarah. Notice Sarah gets the same approval email. Both of them got the same approval email because both are the approvers in this case. In both these scenarios, notice right here I've got the approval email action right here. And here's my link to the phone issue. If I select this, this should directly take me to that list item so they can directly look at it and review it right here. And once they take their approval decision, so let's say James this time goes and says, yes, approved. Okay, issue done. Just going to click on submit. This will go ahead and log this record. The card closes. If I log back in as the user, notice that the ticket status has changed to completed, and look at the approval command. It's actually done an audit trail of the entire approval process right here. The approval was started by Reza, and it was approved by James Taylor at this date and this time, and here are the approval commands. So in this scenario, if you notice, I have a single approval pattern, just one approval. I have multiple approvers, but one approval scenario. And I also have dynamically defined my approvers because my approvers in this scenario are coming from a SharePoint list. Now the next thing I want to show here is how you can avoid using this text approval column. Rather go and use a people picker column in this scenario. So how we can change this? So I will head back to my flow, and this time what I would like to change is how I'm grabbing the approvers. Now first things first, let's look at a flow run first. So this was a flow that ran earlier for this same scenario. And if you remember, I called the get departments action. This has a JSON output and it says outputs click to download. So I'm just going to copy this and I will go to Visual Studio Code and I have formatted my JSON output. Now what I want you guys to focus on is this. It's very important to understand the JSON. So here's the response that I got from that get departments action. It has a property called body. Under that we have value. Value is the list of items that it returns. Remember, it will always return an array. That's why I have the array symbol right here. And in this scenario, it's only returning me one object in that array. And that object is the one response that I have got for the category, which in that case was facilities. Now in there, if we wanted to read the approvers text column, we directly read it right here. You see approvers text. And that's how I got these approvers. Now if I head back to my flow again, and the step wherein we have the set variable action, observe that what the apply to each loop did. If I hover on this, you see it says outputs get departments. That's the name of this action. And then it has something known as body slash value. Now what is body slash value? Well, body is basically this node and value is this node. So it's basically traversing through the nodes in the response object. The next thing is, if you look at the approvers text, it says items of the apply to each loop, and then it's searching for approvers text. That means if I head back to my JSON, under value, in the for loop, that means it's looping through all the items. It's looking for the node called approvers text, which is right here. And that's how it is grabbing this information. Now in my scenario, I want to pick that people picker column, which is of multi-type select. That is right here called approvers. And note, approvers is also an array, right? Why? Because I can have multiple approvers that I define. And for each of those approvers, I have multiple data points that it returns as part of the object. But what I am interested in is the email. So how do I get this information out? Instead of going through this process, just to show you, if I remove the approvers text, and if I just directly try and get the approvers item, notice what it did. It added another apply to each loop. Why? Because value is the array based on my JSON. Approvers is also an array. So an array of an array, and then it kind of gets a little bit more complex. And I'm getting the final item. And this item also that I'm getting is going to be this object. It's not going to be the email. I need to then even traverse through the email. So there's a lot of work that I got to do to get to that item. So let me show you an easier way to get this. I'm going to delete all of this. And instead of this, I will go ahead and there is a data operation action. So search for data operation, pick data operation. There is an action here called select. Okay. It expects an array. So I'm directly going to go and pick the approvers array. And the moment I pick this, it's going to apply the for loop. Of course, it's going to apply the loop purely because the response that I get from the get departments action is an array, which is okay. I know I'm going to get one response. So this loop is fine. But from this array, all what I need is the email, right? I'm just interested in the email. So how do I grab the email? The trick here is in the map property, right here, I have switched to text mode. So switch to text mode, select here, and right here, search for email. And it's called approvers email from the get departments action. Just pick this. Now what it will do is this select action will create an array for me. An array of what? An array of the approvers email addresses. But I don't need an array. Remember, my variable right here, or my final outcome that I need in the start and wait for an approval action, is email addresses semicolon separated. So then I'm going to add another action in the same for loop. It's another data operation called join. I'm going to pick join. Join again expects an array. So this, I'm going to get the output of select right here, and I'm going to join the data in that array with semicolon. So this will give me all the email addresses semicolon separated. And my next step is going to be to set the variable. Which variable? The variable that I created right here for my approvers. I'm going to set the variable. I'm going to pick my approvers. And right here will be the output of join. That's it. That's all I have to do now to replace the logic of hard-coded text email addresses with dynamic approvers coming from people picker column. So this is an example of a single approval scenario where you can dynamically define your approvers and they can come directly from another SharePoint list, where you can define your approvers either in a text column format, or you can also pick them directly from a multi-select person type column in SharePoint. If you like this video, then do comment, like, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will see you in the next Approval Cookbook series video. Thank you so much for watching.